Welcome to my quick hits best decks roundup for Marvel Snap. Today we're going to be running through 4 different groupings of decks. First, we're going to talk about the most popular decks according to public data trackers like Untapped.gg. I'm going to run you through some of the top performing decks in those metrics. I'm going to call out a number of lesser played decks that have very promising stats. And finally, I'm going to close out by talking about some of my personal favorite pocket picks that I'm playing right now. Let's go ahead and jump to it, shall we? Classic Destroy remains the most popular deck in the format after our recent set of changes, while also sporting very reasonable average cube gains and win rate. Honestly, I really like this being a headlining deck in the format. From the Destroy player side, there's a lot of interesting sequencing decisions as you're playing out your cards to try and get the most out of your Forge or your Deadpool as you're blowing up your own cards for profit. And on the opposing side of the board, there's such a huge range of tech cards that allow you to interact profitably with what this deck is doing. If you want proactive disruption, both Armor and Cosmo are quite strong, and if you're on the reactive side, Shang-Chi and Shadow King are both cards you really have to respect as a Destroy player. Various Loki shells make up the second most popular archetype following Destroy on the public trackers, and I honestly want to say, looking at the data and playing the game a bunch myself, I think my initial fears in my patch review video on Tuesday have largely come to be unfounded. While the Loki decks are definitely popular and have strong win rates and average cubes, they're not standout performers against any of the other deck lists that we're going to be talking about in today's video, despite their popularity. It's also worth noting that there is a ton of variation in these Loki shells. The core of 5 cards that are essentially present in every Loki deck are Maria Hill, Snowguard, Collector, America Chavez, and the deck's namesake, Loki. The other 7 cards in the deck list are pretty interchangeable and take a lot of different forms. The deck list that you see on your screen here is one that I'm partial to because I really love bouncing cards back to my hand with Beast and Falcon, but there's builds that aren't playing Werewolf that are being successful. There's builds that aren't playing Elsa that are being successful. There's builds that aren't playing Nico Minaru or bounce cards that are being successful. It really feels like there's a ton of customization that you can build into this archetype to fit both your playstyle and the opposing deck list that you want to hedge against. I'm definitely going to be watching this archetype closely as the format develops more, but as of right now, it is not a standout best deck compared to everything else we have going on, while it is still a fine choice. The third and final deck list in our popular category is the Thanos Prison deck. This one, for those not familiar, it looks to utilize Time Stone as well as Psylocke to accelerate into an early Professor X to lock down a lane, and then you secure your second path by the final turn with a combination of big stat lines from things like Devil Dinosaur and Thanos, or key tech cards that blow away your opponent's stats like Shang-Chi or Alioth. As we move along from the most popular decks to some of the higher performing decks that have smaller metagame shares on the public trackers, we kick things off with Classic Discard. The addition of Dakin to the game as an additional card to provide key stats as well as buffs to Blade and Hellcow have really solidified this archetype's place as a consistent contender in the metagame. Just putting up stats, patch in and patch out as the format changes around it. Discard is an excellent deck to pick up with and learn if you want a really consistent game plan that can put big numbers into play. Anecdotally, I've heard a number of top players also discuss that they feel this deck has a strong matchup into Loki, so if you're encountering that matchup a lot, or if it's just one that you want to be favorable in, this deck list is an excellent choice for that. Sauron Shuri is never terribly popular. If I had to speculate why, I'd say that's because most, myself included, find it terribly boring. This deck list just has super straightforward gameplay. Shuri into Red Skull into Taskmaster, make big numbers, win matchup Marvel Snap. It's quite potent. It basically always has great stats on the tracker, and it's a great deck list if you're looking to just slam into the ladder in the most efficient way possible. As an added bonus, this deck list also has 0 Series 4 or 5 cards, so it's incredibly accessible to players in the mid game who haven't really fleshed out their end game collection yet. Our next top performing list to break down here is the return of a true classic, Zabu Darkhawk, featuring Stature and Black Bolt as their backup stat stick game plan. This deck list is also leveraging Spider-Ham as a low-end disruptive card who is having a fantastic moment in the sun in this post-Mobius landscape since the pigs are no longer made free. This deck list is one of the best ones to be playing right now if you enjoy playing powerful tech cards like Shang-Chi, Enchantress, and Shadow King, backed up by efficient stats in Stature and Darkhawk. Our next top performing list had some ups and downs in the most recent balance changes. While Wave no longer locks your opponent into playing a single card for 4 energy, she's also providing 5 points worth of stats on the board now, which helps you have priority going into your turn where you're going to play a Galactus and blow away the board. Wave's bigger stat line also makes her better to set up that turn 4 Professor X into her path to lock your opponent out. The lack of Mobius in the format also means that this deck list gets to accelerate into its 5 and 6 energy plays more consistently, making both its controlling game plan and Galactus game plan a lot more potent. Our next top performing deck list is one that's almost assuredly been let back out thanks to Mobius essentially being deleted from the game. She-Hulk is a card that gets to enjoy some more time in the sun with her spot in this high evolutionary variation. Essentially, this deck list looks to set up Magic's Limbo, which you can protect with Cosmo to prevent your opponent from getting rid of it. You then deploy a Leech on turn 5 to wipe out whatever strategy or counterplay they have on their hand. You pass on your turn 6 to then slam a massive She-Hulk as well as regular Hulk or Infinite on turn 7 to try and claim victory with a massive stat line. The next 3 deck lists I'm going to highlight in this week's video I'm calling High Potential. They're all deck lists that have really strong win rates and average cube rates on the Untapped tracker, but their sample size are definitely closer to statistically insignificant than not. Let's take a look at some of these sweet deck lists that I think could be breakouts in the right circumstances. Our first high potential deck list is a clutter variation that I think is pretty well positioned into the non-destroy decks in the format. Loki especially really needs absolutely every single space on its board to get value out of what it's looking to do, and clunking them up with green goblins and donated hoods and debris rocks and widow's bites really messes with their jam. This deck list also gets to play Shang-Chi as a powerful tech card to chop down big threats that your opponent might slip into the single spaces they're allowed to play on their board, and we can go toe-to-toe with our own big stat lines thanks to Spider-Woman and Dr. Octopus in tandem with Titania or Hood's Demon on the final turn of the game. Our next high potential deck list is one that I've not been able to feature in a best decks video in some time, and that's Silver Surfer. You'll note that this deck list is featuring Marvel Snap's latest release, Werewolf by Night, and I don't think that's an accident. One of the reasons why Silver Surfer has always struggled more recently, in my opinion, is because it fails to have threats that can get really big in individual lanes, meaning in a lot of matchups you struggle to contest the big stat lines that your opponents are putting into play. Werewolf by Night is a card that can regularly get up to 9 or even double digits points worth of stats, and when you combine that with 3 energy 5 power things like Polaris and Spider-Man, or a 3 energy 7 power thing like Maximus, Silver Surfer can top these cards off to regularly putting you to 20 plus stats, letting you compete with a lot of what is going on in the current metagame. Our final high potential deck list is one that I've been working on my live stream that others have been playing to great effect as well, and that is the Darkhawk Bounce variation. This deck list gets to generate really big stat lines with its namesake while also being incredibly disruptive, with Korg and Black Widow being played out over and over again with Beast and Falcon. You'll note that my preferred list here is featuring Werewolf by Night, but I think that slot can also be Angela or Collector or Elsa, depending on what your collection looks like and what type of game plan you're looking to execute. Personally, I have been enjoying Werewolf in that slot just because the way it moves around the board makes it difficult to tag with opposing tech cards like Shang-Chi and Shadow King, but the other options do have merit, especially because they're slightly more resource efficient at just 2 energy. As always, I'm going to close out our deck list video today with a couple of personal pocket picks that I've been enjoying on the ladder, but they've not been picked up by the greater population yet, so there's no meaningful stats for them on the trackers. The first of these is Nico Minoru headlining Cerebro 2. I honestly wasn't expecting her to be such a phenomenal addition to this deck, but she really kind of does it all. She can duplicate a Cerebro for us. She can make a Cerebro have 2 power. She can draw us extra cards cards to help us find our deck's namesake. She can reset a problematic location. Really, you're happy with any of her spells other than making a 6-power demon, which obviously breaks up our combo. You'll also note that I'm leveraging recently redesigned Teenage Warhead in this deck list as well. After playing a couple dozen games with her, she really feels pretty good, especially going into turn 6 games where you have priority and can blow up one of your opponent's final plays as a surprise. If you want to see this deck in action, be sure to check back in again tomorrow for a Cerebro 2 highlight featuring these 12 cards here on the channel. My final pocket pick today is an updated variation of a deck list that I covered last week, sent to me by my buddy Doob Snacks. This is the Zero Typhoid Mary Shell that also gets to leverage Luke Cage as a way to mitigate her drawback. And this deck list always had a bunch of different on-reveal effects, meaning our latest release, Werewolf by Night, slots really eloquently into here. This deck list is phenomenal at putting big stats into play while also playing fantastically powerful tech cards like Enchantress, Shadow King, and Luke Cage to disrupt whatever our opponent's strategy might be bringing to the table. All in all, I think Marvel Snap's current balance is in a relatively good place. That's not only my anecdotal experience playing lots of ladder matches in the top 500, it's also what's reflected on public trackers like Untapped, and second dinner team member Glenn Jones recently commented that Loki is a popular deck and among the best, but right now their data indicates it's one of many strong, healthy decks, none of which are currently crossing their balance thresholds. The Wednesday after the most recent balance patch was possibly the most diverse the top of the Marvel Snap ladder has ever been in the history of the game. I'd love to know if all of this matches your experience at home as well in a comment down below. And as always, if you enjoyed my musings on this topic, snap that like button and make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss lots of fantastic Snap content here, like a delicious Cerebro 2 highlight that'll be coming tomorrow.